really terrible because like you have this one image of your parents for your whole life, and then like 20 years old, you're like, oh wait, that's still a thing. Like it's possible. Like with my family, and like you just kind of are like, all right, like my world's flipped upside down for a bit. Because like at least when you're younger, you can like bounce back, but like being older, you're kind of like you're used to something. Like you have a set way for this amount of years.
I think I really understood at that time because I was still kind of young, but I knew like my mom was always really honest with me, so I think I just was like okay with it because she was like explaining like why this is like going to be like better for our family kind of.
Really understood it because I was so young. I don't even really remember it. I just feel like one day, like they just were no longer together. I don't really remember them ever sitting me down and telling me, but I mean, they obviously had to have.
Initial reaction was that I was actually happy because throughout my childhood they would just fight. So it was kind of a relief for the whole family. Divorce was pretty easy for me because I stayed close with my mom and my dad, and I was really close with my brother who helped me too.
Talking to my mom a lot and like talking to my dad and staying close to like both of them and like my siblings and stuff. Like we all just, yeah.
I got really into running. Like I found that to be really like stress relieving. I mean, I'd run a lot because like you're in your thoughts, which is nice. But then I found talking out my feelings was really nice to do. So I talked to my friends who had divorced parents. I talked to like people who didn't have divorced parents just to like kind of get comfortable with the idea of it, I guess.
In high school and stuff, like having to get a ride like from both my parents or like figuring out where I needed to get dropped off that night and like kind of like equaling my time between like both of my parents. Distant from my dad, and I like really blamed it all on my dad, and I didn't really want anything to do with him. But like as I got older, I kind of like understood that it wasn't like just my dad's fault. Like there was like obviously two sides to it. So now like we're super close and everything like that. But in the beginning, it definitely affected our relationship like negatively.
My dad was gay, so that I think was the hardest part for me to find out because like that's two things to be shocked about. So like I think that was the hardest part, but then it was also very relieving to hear because they're like, oh, this all makes sense now, you know.
A schedule, which helped. I would spend, certain days of the week with my dad and certain days of the week with my mom. So having like a set time when I knew I was going to see them was nice. My mom got full custody of me in the divorce, so I immediately lived with my mom most of the time and became a lot closer with her. And then my dad, I don't really see as often now that I'm getting older.
That shock factor, I think, is where it hits students the hardest of not knowing or understanding why their parents weren't going to be staying together. In those instances, I think it's really important to be able to talk about the feelings going on, the confusion. A lot of times, I've heard a lot of students talk about how then they're afraid to get into relationships because if their parents who they thought were having a good marriage obviously, weren't, then there's this concern of, well, why bother getting into a relationship myself? Because, obviously there's no guarantee the relationship will, if possible, get support and talk to the siblings, or if possible, to try to communicate as openly and be honest with their feelings. A lot of times, college students are afraid of hurting their parents' feelings, and if they were to share how they really felt about it, communication, I think, is the best way to try to understand what happened to whatever degree is appropriate, but also to recognize their feelings, whatever they are totally valid, and I think it's great to be able to talk to peers. And if they're having a really hard time with the whole family, situation changing and finding their role in it, if talking to their friends isn't enough for support, there are places like here and other places that they can go and talk to professionals who can try to help them navigate that, that question